Picture this. You're standing in a football stadium, the crowd is deafening, thousands of fans chanting, eyes glued to the pitch. A young boy from one of the poorest countries in the world stands ready to make history. This is the story of a man who defied all odds, going from kicking a ball in the streets of Liberia to being crowned the best footballer on the planet, and then, shockingly, becoming the president of his country. Sound impossible? This is the story of George Weah, a life that reads like a Hollywood script, but with more twists and turns than you could ever imagine. Let's take a trip back to the very beginning. George Taulan Mane Opong Usman Weah was born on October 1st, 1966, in Clara Town, one of the most poverty-stricken neighborhoods in Liberia. His upbringing was anything but glamorous. In fact, it was a struggle just to get by. George's family, like most in the area, was dirt poor. His father was a mechanic, and his mother sold fish in the local markets. George had 12 siblings, and in a house that small, you can imagine how hard life must have been. Food wasn't guaranteed, and schooling was inconsistent. George, like many kids in Liberia, grew up without many opportunities. But there was something different about George. He had a gift that would change not only his life, but the course of his country's history. That gift was football. As a kid, George Weah would spend hours and hours playing football in the dusty streets of Clara Town. And here's the crazy part. He played barefoot. That's right. No boots, no shin pads, no professional equipment, just pure passion. Can you imagine that? Most of us wouldn't even walk on gravel without shoes. But George? He was sprinting on rocks, dodging past makeshift goals, determined to make every shot count. This wasn't just a game to him. Football was his escape. It was his dream, and despite having every reason to give up, he kept going. Day after day, the streets became his training ground. By the time he was a teenager, George's talent couldn't be ignored. His speed, his dribbling, his sheer tenacity on the field, it was like nothing anyone had ever seen. At 15, he joined a local club called Young Survivors, a fitting name for a kid who had to fight for everything in life. Young Survivors wasn't a professional team. They didn't have fancy facilities or top-notch coaches, but what they lacked in resources, George made up for in raw talent. Soon enough, word about this barefoot wonder started to spread. Scouts from Liberia's top teams were taking notice. George made a move to Mighty Ballon, one of the more prominent clubs in the country, and just like that, his professional career began. Within a short time, George went from playing street ball to competing in the Liberian Premier League. He moved from Mighty Ballon to Invincible 11, one of the biggest teams in Liberia. At Invincible 11, George's performances were nothing short of breathtaking, but what really stood out was his hunger. George wasn't just playing football for fun. He was playing to escape the poverty, to help his family, to create a future no one thought was possible. And here's something incredible. George Weah won the Liberian Premier League with both Mighty Ballon and Invincible 11 before the age of 22. In the local football scene, he was already a legend, but this was just the start. Europe was about to come calling. In 1988, a moment that would change George's life forever happened. A Liberian coach who had connections with European football circles made a recommendation that would prove to be one of the most important in football history. He suggested George to Arsène Wenger, then manager of AS Monaco, one of France's top clubs. Now this part is crucial. George Weah had never played on a grass field before moving to Europe. Let that sink in for a moment. Everything he knew about football, every trick, every dribble, he learned on rough dirt pitches. Yet, here he was, about to move to one of the biggest footballing nations in the world. This wasn't just a leap, it was a giant leap. Could a kid from Liberia with no real formal training make it in the most competitive leagues in the world? Wenger saw something special in George and decided to take a chance on him. And that's when everything changed. In his first season with Monaco, George didn't just meet expectations, he smashed them. He scored 14 goals in his debut season, catching the attention of the entire footballing world. But that was only the beginning. George Weah's star continued to rise. After Monaco, George moved to Paris Saint-Germain, PSG, where he truly made a name for himself. At PSG, George led the team to win the French league title, and his performances in the UEFA Champions League were nothing short of electric. But here's where George really set himself apart. In 1994-95, George Weah became the top scorer in the Champions League, scoring against some of Europe's best defenders. And it wasn't just about the number of goals, it was the way he played. His blistering pace, his strength, his ability to dribble past entire defenses. George Weah was a one-man wrecking crew. His performances earned him a move to one of Europe's biggest clubs, AC Milan, and that's where history was made. Let's talk about the Ballon d'Or for a second. This is football's highest honor. It's awarded to the best player in the world, an honor most players only dream of. In 1995, George Weah did the unthinkable. He became the first and to this day, the only African player to ever win the Ballon d'Or. A boy from the slums of Liberia who grew up kicking a ball around barefoot was now the best footballer on the planet. This wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a triumph for all of Africa. George Weah put an entire continent on the football map. That same year, he also won the FIFA World Player of the Year award and the African Footballer of the Year award. 3 huge titles in a single year. It was a football fairy tale, except it was all real. Now, we can't talk about George Weah without mentioning one of the greatest goals in football history. In 1996, while playing for AC Milan, Weah scored a goal that left fans and commentators speechless. Starting from his own penalty box, George sprinted the entire length of the field, dribbling past half of the opposing team, before calmly slotting the ball into the net. It was a moment of pure genius. To this day, people still talk about that goal as one of the best solo efforts ever seen. While George was conquering Europe, his heart remained in Liberia. During the Liberian Civil War, George Weah became a voice for peace. He donated millions of his own money to help people in need, building schools and hospitals. He wasn't just a footballer, he was a humanitarian. His success wasn't just his, it was for all Liberians. Here's a little-known fact. Even at the height of his football career, George would regularly send money back to Liberia to help families, children, and communities devastated by the war. He personally funded youth programs, paid for scholarships, and even helped restore the country's national football stadium. But George wasn't done. Football was only one part of his legacy. His journey was about to take an even more dramatic turn. After retiring from football, most players relax, maybe take on some coaching roles or do TV work. But not George Weah. He had a much bigger dream in mind. In 2005, George Weah ran for the presidency of Liberia. It was a bold move. Could a former footballer really lead a nation? His first attempt wasn't successful. He lost the election, but George didn't back down. Instead, he used this setback to learn, grow, and prepare for the next round. Over the next decade, George immersed himself in politics, determined to bring change to his country. Fast forward to 2017. After years of dedication, George Weah ran for president again, and this time he won. The boy who had grown up in the slums of Clara Town was now the leader of Liberia. It was an incredible moment for his country. George's message was simple. He wanted to rebuild Liberia, focusing on education, healthcare, and job creation. But George's presidency wasn't just about his success. It was about the success of his people. He represented hope for millions of Liberians, showing them that no matter where you come from, anything is possible if you believe and work hard. From the dusty streets of Liberia to the Ballon d'Or stage and the presidential office, George Weah's life is a true testament to the power of perseverance, talent, and heart. He didn't just change football, he changed lives. And that's what makes him a true legend. What do you think of George Weah's incredible journey? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing stories about legendary figures who defied the odds.